This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, despite some losses in China's markets today, gains in most other bourses sent MSCI's index of emerging markets shares closer to one-month highs today. South Africa's JSE gained over 1% as investors react to some friendly tones between the United States and China about their bilateral relations, as well as upbeat earnings on Wall Street today. Now, MSCI's index of emerging market shares was up 0.2%. At the JSE, all major indices were up. The industrial 25 climbed the highest, up by 1.6% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show. Sudan's top general says the justice system will be restored by the end of the week. EU ministers meet for crisis talks on the energy price spike. And South Africa's urban gardens feed the homeless. Well, let's begin in Sudan, where the country's top general has said the justice system in the country will be restored by the end of the week. This includes the Chief Prosecution, the Supreme Judiciary Council, and the Constitutional Court. Additionally, the Legislative Council will include the youth who took part in the revolution in Sudan and who have no political affiliations. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said this during the media conference a day after Monday's military takeover. Now, Burhan said political fragmentation and a deadlock in talks during the transitional period forced the military to step in. So far, the government of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been dissolved alongside the Sovereign Council, which is a joint military and civilian ruling body.
There were people talking about racism that was driving this country to reach the civil war that leads to the fragmentation of this country, stabbing its unity, its consistency, and social society. These threats were in front of us, and we saw it broadcasted to all people, and everybody was talking about it, without equivocation and without responsibility, that these issues have a direct impact on the national security and on the armed forces.
Well, let's now discuss the latest developments further with Dr. Matthew Benson. He is a Sudan and South Sudan director at the Conflict in the Research Program at the London School of Economics. Now, Sudan, great to have you on the show with us, Dr. Benson. Now, Sudan's military leader has now dissolved that transitional cabinet and, of course, the Sovereign Council, which we know is the joint military and civilian body leading the country. He has also suspended constitutional articles that were meant to guide that transitional period post the Bashir era. So what does this bode for the country's progress towards democracy and elections in 2023?
I think a lot of this will come down to the way that the international community and to the way that the government of Sudan listens to the civilian protesters who are still peacefully protesting on the ground. And it's actually could potentially result in richer discussions about the country's economic situation. As we know, the situation on the ground has been terrible for most Sudanese, and there's a real push and necessity for the government to be able to demonstrate quick wins that can help the transition go, actually demonstrate the meaning of the transition in people's lives in a more clear manner. So I actually see this as an opportunity for the actual aims of the revolution, which were always about a more meaningful democratic transition and weren't necessarily about the government still being led by the military, for those aims to actually be realized. So it's actually an opportunity for the international community as well as for the government to pay attention to those concerns rather than fall back into the same patterns that we've seen in Sudan for the past 60 years, and under British occupation, similar patterns also existed.
Well, let's talk about how the coup drew global condemnation. The U.S. has now halted about $700 million in aid. Also, the UN Security Council will be meeting today, or they met today to discuss the crisis in Sudan. What are your expectations in terms of their response and suddenly the prospects of normalizing ties, Sudan normalizing ties with the international community?
Now is probably one of the most critical moments the international community could ever, their engagement is needed now more than ever. And it's also a time, again, to reframe how the international community has been engaging with Sudan. The IMF reforms that have been going on in the country have actually pushed for a lot of the for the removal of subsidies that have actually contributed to the economic crisis, which contributed to the whole crisis is related to this economic situation. And without this resolved, and without actually thinking through more clearly how the international community can actually aid this transition, either through some sort of mechanism that by multilateral and bilateral assistance can help the country generate quick wins that support a democratic transition and shift away from the country's increasing sway or pull towards the Gulf countries, which have their own agenda, which are not democratic for those on the ground. So it's a chance for a more meaningful actually listening to those who are on the ground who are protesting and actually pushing for a peaceful democratic transition for that to take place. So I see this again as an opportunity to actually achieve the full demands of the revolution that have been pushed for us in late 2018, early 2019. The question is how do you get those over? And it means doing things. It's not necessarily business as usual. And I think there's a real push for innovation, and a very rapid response to this is desperately needed. I'm optimistic that that might be possible because people see that how the risks of the economic situation, if they still continue to deteriorate in people's lives, then you can see how this provides openings for non-democratic elements to actually continue their push for self-enrichment rather than actually trying to help the majority of people improve their lives, which is desperately needed in the country.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about what this means for the country's economy, because Prime Minister Hamdok had actually began to implement a number of economic reforms. But since this coup, as a result of that showdown between the military and the people, airports, businesses are all closed. Central bank staff have gone on strike, and doctors refuse to work in military-run hospitals. Now, for a country that was already in a deep economic crisis, how bad could this get?
The situation was already bad for most Sudanese. So I think one needs to look at this more critically. What I worry about is potential for more regional political marketplaces to be shaped by the gap or the opening that this provides. I mean, so really there's a challenge over raising enough revenue that actually can support, again, the democratic transition and how this can be done in a meaningful way. So I think the situation is already there for most. It's already the whole reason that this revolution took place was, again, over the fact that fuel and bread were too expensive for ordinary people. So I don't see this as something where the situation necessarily deteriorates more. What I see more is the risk of increased fragmentation in Sudan over non-democratic elements in the country, and increased being able to increase regional tensions, and that the center can no longer hold. So you can see this in Red Sea and in eastern parts of Sudan, and that's the major risk here, is how do you actually build an economic bargain that holds the country together and actually, again, supports a democratic transition and listens to those who are on the ground, who are actually trying and already thinking through very innovative ways in which to change the way that the state works for them, and actually change the way that local and economies are working. And I think those are it really provides a chance for innovation rather than one of kind of doomsday type thinking. So I would actually challenge the idea that things will necessarily get worse. Now is the moment to reimagine everything. And we're already seeing on the ground that Sudanese are helping all of us see the ways in which it can be reimagined. This is not business as usual, and people are refusing to adhere to the same logics that have led us down this path in the first place. That gives us cause for hope, and we should be able to try our best to support that.
Well, on that note, there actually have been a number of previous coup attempts since that agreement between the civilian and military leaders was signed back in 2019. What does this coup and, of course, the previous coup attempts reveal about the strength of that agreement and possibly how they should move going forward?
it reveals what we always knew. We always knew that the economic considerations that actually contributed to the revolution taking place in the first place were not seriously enough considered within the economic bargain or the political bargain that was struck. Again, I think this is a real opportunity to, if we're able to support a democratic transition, as everyone hopes is sincerely possible in the country, then this is actually a chance to reframe what this means and how do you actually remove the non-democratic elements in the state, which are not interested in how you make everyone's lives better. They're more interested in self-enrichment. So if you're able to actually challenge this and call this out and reduce the threat and show that they are not representing the will of the people, they are representing their own interests. And that's what these protests, as far as I understand, are mostly about and need to still be supported. So the legacy of coups is actually one that should give us hope, that you can see on the ground that people are so frustrated with this, that they are still refusing to let this to lie down whilst this happens. It's now in a critical moment, and I'd like to see more support given towards those on the ground who are trying to prevent this from happening yet again.
Well, we do have to leave you there. Many thanks for your insights today, Dr. Benson. That is Dr. Matthew Benson, joining us there from the London School of Economics. And moving on now, central banks around the world are now producing their own digital currencies. You'll remember that Nigeria is the latest to do so in a groundbreaking move for the African continent. The country launched its digital currency, the e-Naira, amid growing local and global demand for cryptocurrencies. While Nigeria joins about 14 other nations in the pilot stages with their own central bank digital currencies. And Kelechi Emekalam brings us some reactions from Nigeria since the launch took place on Monday.
We have become the first country in Africa and one of the first in the world to introduce a digital currency to her citizens.
A landmark moment for Nigeria as President Muhammadu Buhari unveils its digital currency, the e-Naira. It's a huge turn from the country's central bank's stance in February banning all cryptocurrency transactions. Authorities now see it as a profitable venture.
Some estimates indicate that the adoption of central bank digital currencies and its underlying technology, called blockchain, can increase Nigeria's GDP by 29 billion United States dollars over the next 10 years.
And it seems to be raising the much desired interest from several quarters.
33 banks are fully integrated and live on the platform. 500 million naira has been successfully minted by the CBN. 200 million naira has been issued to financial institutions. Over 2,000 customers have been onboarded on the platform, and over 120 merchants have successfully registered on the e-platform.
Cryptocurrencies are popular in Nigeria. In 2020, leading Bitcoin marketplace Paxful placed Nigeria as second world's Bitcoin market after the US. However, many Nigerians still have reservations about the country's new digital currency.
And I think the challenge now will be improving our internet space because we don't have good internet infrastructure in Nigeria.
I'm not quite sure I trust the space enough because we've heard instances of hacking and things like that. But yeah, it could still be a really good idea in the long haul. So.
Central banks around the world are working to create digital versions of their legal tenders. China was the first country to launch a test version of its digital currency. 5 others have followed suit since then. Nigeria's government says the e-Naira would improve cross-border trade, boost financial inclusion for people outside the formal economy, and increase remittances. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's now turn our attention to some corporate headlines today. South Africa's Sibanye-Stillwater has agreed to pay $1 billion in cash for nickel and copper mines in Brazil. This deal highlights the race to supply battery metals to the booming electric vehicle sector. Now, the company's shares have surged as much as 3.9% in Johannesburg trading, following the announcement of talks to acquire those mines. And an audit by Kenya's Energy Ministry has revealed that state-owned power utility, Kenya Power, holds an estimated $88.2 million in dead stock. This further underlines the electricity suppliers procurement programs. The dead stock includes terms such as cables, meters, and transformers that have been sitting in the warehouses for more than 5 years. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is rapidly approaching a net worth of $300 billion as Tesla's market cap soars past $1 trillion, making him more valuable than ExxonMobil Corporation. As of Monday's close, Musk's net worth was $289 billion, which of course surpasses the $272 billion market value of ExxonMobil. The $36.2 billion gain followed a surge in Tesla's stock price. That's after Hertz Global Holdings ordered 100,000 cars. And Facebook shares rose 1.3% in after-hours trading on Monday. That's after the company reported better than expected third-quarter earnings. This is while it continues to face bad press over leaked internal documents. The social media giant made $9 billion of profit in the 3 months to September. That's up from $7.8 billion last year. However, it was hit by a new privacy update to Apple's iOS 14 operating system, which made it harder for brands to target ads at specific users. This comes amid fresh claims of unethical behavior made by former employees. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading to a short break now. Do stay with us. More business after this.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, as world leaders get ready to attend the COP26 meetings in Glasgow, South Africa's Eskom has become the world's largest single emitter of sulfur dioxide. Now it's now outstripping the entire power sector emissions of any country in the world. That, of course, is excluding India, according to a study by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. So, is the country ready to meet its emission reduction commitments? Well, Angelo Coppola brings us more.
Some questions have been raised about whether South Africa has everything in place, from a policy, legislation and regulatory perspective, to deliver on its emission targets.
I don't think we do. I think that the President certainly has got a vision around this. We've made some astoundingly large commitments that will be delivered in Glasgow next week. To my mind, they are purely aspirational, and the big challenge there is going to be in integrating that vision across some fairly complex ministries, from the presidency to energy to environment to finance and so on.
There is some policy in place and a regulatory framework managed by the National Electricity Regulator aimed at monitoring the energy environment. However, one area still lacking is national standards for carbon offset schemes that allow companies to invest in environmental projects so that they can balance out their own carbon footprints.
It's very, very important for us at the moment. We are still subject to international standards, which are sometimes expensive and time-consuming to get through the various hurdles.
There's another challenge facing the country, according to Kramer.
The energy ministry is very much behind the coal industry and while it talks about other additional forms of power, there isn't an upstream exploration bill adequately in place yet. We've done precious little to connect renewables to the grid, and then we've got the financing challenges.
The country's mineral and energy minister sees coal being used for several more years, and any move away to other energy sources has to ensure that local communities near coal mines aren't negatively affected, the so-called just transition. Cabinet generally agrees with this approach, while at the same time it recently set more ambitious emission targets.
We've been hearing mixed messages from our politicians about wanting to reach a net zero goal, but possibly hanging along a bit longer onto coal as a fuel source. So we need to have a uniform message.
The just transition is going to require policy certainty, and it's got to happen quite quickly so that we don't fall further behind. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, as COP26 draws closer, let's delve further into the negotiations that certainly will take place and, of course, the opportunities for Africa this year. We're now joined by Dr. Asha Mohammed. She is the Secretary General at the Kenya Red Cross Society. Great to have you on the show with us, Ms. Asha. Now, despite contributing less than 5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, we know that Africa now carries the heaviest burden in regards to climate change and its effects. Now, African leaders are calling on richer nations to do more, certainly make Africa a priority this year and a major part of the agenda at the COP26. What are your expectations?
Thank you very much. And yes, very important timing. A lot has already been going on, and we have seen the devastating impacts of climate change on the African continent. And my expectation really is that in the discussions at COP26, that we will bring the reality of what is on the ground to these discussions so that we can relate actually some of these global commitments to the reality on the ground. Already very many people are affected, and it is a reality we're dealing with. So how to balance dealing with the effects of the climate change as it is, and also committing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and working on the global perspective.
Well, some believe that developed nations have already fallen short by at least 20 billion US dollars. That means the promise they made to raise about $100 billion a year to support climate change adaptation and, of course, mitigation in vulnerable nations. Are there any clear plans this time around for how this deficit will be met, and certainly any additional funding plans that Africa may be looking to get?
Well, I think we are hoping to hear from the nations that will be attending this conference in terms of, what priorities they are going to make. Yes, we understand that there are many other needs globally, but it's about prioritizing what will make the difference, because we may not have necessarily all the money that is required today because a lot has happened, but how do we prioritize even whatever is available and ensure that a good amount of resources is actually channeled to the issue of climate change so as to actually make a difference? So I think as Africa, we will be expecting to see some tangible commitments in terms of addressing this.
Well, on that note, at this year's COP26, countries will be launching their adaptation goals and, of course, adopt strategies for achieving those goals. So what opportunities do you think African countries have to sort of shape the agenda this time around?
I'm hoping that Africa can bring the experiences of what we are going through today, and hopefully this can be helped by the fact that the effects of climate change have also been seen in other continents, in other parts of the world. We've seen that in America, we've seen it in Europe, and we hope that when Africa talks about the vulnerabilities that are being seen, that this is not going to be something out of this world, that everyone can relate to what actually this means, and therefore hopefully that will bring some seriousness into this discussion.
Some African countries are playing their part when it comes to the transition to cleaner energy. We know Morocco has taken the lead globally in the production of solar energy. Kenya is now harnessing geothermal energy. What are your thoughts on the progress that Africa as a whole and Kenya is making when we're trying to transition to that cleaner energy going forward?
I think it's very encouraging that a lot of the countries on the continent are going in this direction. And yes, for Kenya, we see a lot of progress, including even the use of solar more, because this is something we can talk about as of abundance in Africa, and therefore we need to be able to harness this, to use this for a lot of our systems as opposed to using fuel. So it's encouraging, but for sure it needs a lot more investment. And I think this is where African nations need support to be able to make this change happen.
All right. Well, many thanks, Ms. Asha, for your insights. That was Dr. Asha Mohammed, Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross Society. Well, let's move on now to Tunisia. The country is mandating COVID-19 vaccine passes for Tunisians and foreign travelers. A presidential decree issued on Friday said that officials, employees and visitors are required to show a card providing inoculation against the coronavirus. It is required to access public and private facilities in the country. Here's Adnan Shaushi with the latest.
The president of the COVID-19 vaccination campaign and head of Pasteur Institute in Tunis explained that vaccine pass will also be required to enter malls, cafes, restaurants, bars, hotels and tourist resorts.
The vaccine is not compulsory. It's still free and not mandatory. People have misunderstood the decree. Yes, many citizens are vaccinated. They can resume a normal life and go anywhere, just like vaccinated tourists. However, the state will not impose the vaccine on those who refuse it, but they will not be allowed to enter any closed private or public facility without the pass. People have to take responsibility for their choices.
Hashmi Louzir added that there are some people who can't get a COVID-19 vaccine for medical reasons.
There are some exceptions and very rare cases of patients who suffer from diseases or allergies and could show side effects after vaccination. They are treated separately. They will be given the pass even without a COVID-19 vaccination. This is a very small portion of the population.
According to the scientific committee at the health department, Tunisia is split on vaccine passes.
I completed my vaccination, but I don't think it should be made mandatory. People have the right to refuse it, but their freedom of movement will be restricted.
I am diabetic. I'm forced to get vaccinated in order to travel abroad and live a normal life, but I'm not convinced about the safety and efficiency of vaccines. The authorities are pushing for more restrictions and imposing the vaccine pass in an indirect way.
The COVID-19 task force has announced that 37 patients are currently on life support in public and private hospitals, and 116 are in intensive care. Tunisia has recorded more than 25,100 deaths since the outbreak of the pandemic in the North African country in March 2020. Many Tunisians believe that the ease or freedom to work and engage in leisure activities will be limited by the health pass. The health department plans to launch a COVID-19 awareness campaign and to step up the vaccination operation in the next few days. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, sessions at the Cairo Water Week conference are shining a light on how the North African nation is battling the impact of climate change in its coastal areas. According to those sessions, if action is not taken urgently, some resort cities and industrial areas could be displaced by water within a decade. Here's Yasser Hakim with more.
It's an urgent situation. The heavily populated cities on the River Nile and on the Mediterranean Sea, including Alexandria, are threatened by the effects of climate change and global warming.
The state realized the huge dangers it faces from this issue after the beachline was eroded by more than 4.5 kilometers east of Rashid City and 2.6 kilometers of the Eastern Nile Path in Damietta City. This threatens investments on the coastline, weather, agricultural land, industrial projects, and coastal resort cities that could perish from the map.
In 2018, the North African country launched a project to enhance the country's resilience and adaptation to environmental changes. The project, in partnership with the Green Climate Fund and the UNDP, aims at protecting the Delta region and the northern coast from the impacts of climate change. The director of the project says it will initially cost more than $100 million.
The project deals with the sea level rise impacts in the Nile Delta. So we are building dunes to stop the water from flooding the land and to protect people and their infrastructure. And in the long term, we are also developing an integrated coastal zone management plan that will manage the development in the north coast of Egypt, and it will ensure sustainability of the development and also will protect the investments.
Knowing these efforts are not enough, the government has included the Shore Protection Authority to help prevent beach erosions in 5 of the coastal governorates at a cost of $310 million.
First, we are working on protecting the 69 kilometers on the East Delta coastline, which is the most vulnerable to climate change. In the best case scenario, this area will totally go underwater from flooding. We have finished securing 45 kilometers from the 69 kilometers. The second phase is doing the studies for all the northern coastlines on the Mediterranean Sea to define the environmental changes taking place, solutions for these issues, and how to reaccommodate people and investments in the area.
According to the government, if these issues are not dealt with within the next 10 years, then more than 5 million people from the Nile Delta region will be displaced. Also, Egypt's main crops and arable land will decrease by 19%, damaging the economy and putting 4 million people out of work. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still to come on the show. EU ministers meet for crisis talks on the energy price spike. And Singapore's luxury property market sees a massive boost in sales.
change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
And now let's turn our attention to some international news. EU ministers have met in Luxembourg to discuss a way out of the energy crisis. European gas prices have hit record highs in autumn and remain at lofty levels. Now, this has prompted most EU countries to respond with emergency measures such as price caps and subsidies to help trim consumer energy bills. The EU countries are struggling to agree, however, on a long-term plan in order to cushion against fossil fuel price swings. Some say this warrants a bigger shake-up of the way EU energy markets work.
We believe that the functioning of the electricity market, the gas market, and the emission rights market must be revised, reviewed, and analysed, and therefore Spain has a non-paper with strong proposals in these three main blocks that were highlighted at last week's European Council.
I think that the Spanish government is over-promising by saying joint gas procurement will solve the crisis. What will solve the crisis is efficiency investments, continue with reliable investments into renewables, and what Spain needs most is interconnections.
I do hope to hear clear messages from ministers. What are their expectations? If we're talking about medium-term measures, this also means that we have to start acting right now, despite the fact that the results of those actions will be foreseen in years to come, not in next weeks.
And heading to Asia now, digital transformation is top on the agenda at the ASEAN Summit as the pandemic has exposed the dangers of relying too heavily on labor-intensive industries. Now, the ongoing labor shortages in several countries has now added urgency to increasing the use of automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence, as well as transitioning to Industry 4.0. Here's Rianne Amelza reporting from Kuala Lumpur.
With increased automation, Malaysia's glove industry has sustained annual double-digit growth for a decade without increasing its workforce. But throughout ASEAN, many industries are still far too labor-intensive, as the pandemic has exposed, something ASEAN's leaders know needs to change. The World Economic Forum says ASEAN is the fastest-growing internet market in the world, and e-commerce and e-payments have boomed during the pandemic. It's a start.
That's the positive outcome of the current pandemic, in the sense that it has emphasized the need for a faster pace of digitalization, especially in terms of closing the digital divide between countries as well as within countries, between the urban and rural areas.
ASEAN faces a yawning gulf in skills and technology adoption, with Singapore at one end and Cambodia, Myanmar and Laos at the other. Analysts say ASEAN countries need to leverage on the know-how and investment of countries such as Germany and China to speed up the transition to Industry 4.0.
The lack of digital skills is a major impediment to ASEAN moving forward with digital transformation. So the focus on training that many of these overseas companies have been providing will be very useful. Huawei has set up an academy here in Malaysia to train workforce, particularly in AI, in robotics and Internet of Things. And the more skills transfers that we see, the better we will be prepared for that new digital world.
ASEAN aims to collaborate on building skills as well as improving regional connectivity by, for example, creating a common framework for e-payments.
Analysts say ASEAN countries must learn from each other's mistakes and successes as they seek to digitalize their societies, industries and economies and rebound from the pandemic. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
Meanwhile, in Singapore, the luxury property market has witnessed a massive boost in sales this year. Experts say the demand is not only being driven by the ultra-rich, but also young executives from Singapore who are working in emerging sectors such as the biomedical sector and fintech. Here's CGTN's Miralu reporting.
Despite facing its worst recession on record amid the pandemic, luxury home sales in Singapore hit a 10-year high in the second quarter of 2021. The country's prime districts saw sales jump to 1,930 transactions, which is the highest showing from a single quarter since 2010.
Right now, we have seen those Singaporeans that are buying, there are different class of people. Some of these people are actually working in those emerging industries. So that may include like biomedical, fintech, big tech. Some of the industries that are still doing very well or even better because of the pandemic.
Another driver, according to experts, is supply, as construction of new luxury properties in land-strapped Singapore usually takes place once every 8 to 10 years.
It's quite seldom that they release new land or redevelop new land. And what we are seeing is that right now, they are actually introducing many luxury homes that are very attractive.
Buoyed by strong demand, new and resale luxury properties have seen a spike in prices. In the first 3 quarters of this year, 74 buyers spent more than 10 million Singapore dollars on their new home. Even a one-bedroom apartment in this luxury condo project in the heart of Singapore would cost $1 million. Still, half of the units were sold on launch day alone. Property agents say the market is hot these days thanks to local buyers as well as foreign investors who want to park their cash in a safe haven. With a high vaccination rate and a robust healthcare system, Singapore ticks all the right boxes for international investors. So much so, they don't even mind paying the additional stamp duty of 20% that the city-state levies on foreign buyers.
Singapore is a very attractive country to most of the foreigners, being it is in a very good location. We have very stable politics, no natural disasters, and we have a very good education system. And during this pandemic, we have also seen the death rates being very low.
Agents also pointed out that unlike pre-pandemic times when people would choose homes closer to their offices, they're now looking for more spacious and less noisy locations. Industry insiders are optimistic that further reopening by Singapore and the resultant economic rebound might further boost the sales of luxury homes here. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Gold prices eased today. That's after climbing nearly 1% on Monday to a high of around 1,809 dollars per ounce. Now, prices were weighed down by an uptick in the dollar and U.S. bond yields as investors continue to assess central banks' likely responses to higher inflation ahead of upcoming policy meetings. Meanwhile, oil prices edging slightly higher today, still riding a rally driven by strong demand in the U.S. And a quick look at the soft commodities today. Robusta coffee futures on the ICE rose to a 4.5-year peak. Arabica prices also climbed today. Dealers say the market was supported by a major shortage of shipping containers in Vietnam. That was, of course, curbing those exports. Also, renewed outbreaks of COVID-19 in the country. The world's top Robusta producer could now hinder cherry picking when the harvest gets underway next month. On that note, let's take a short break now. Here's a look at what's still coming up on the show. EU ministers meet for crisis talks on the energy price spike.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Now, urban pavement and community gardens are sprouting up all over South Africa. In the coastal city of Durban, these gardens have become a source of food and income even for the homeless. Now, there was major concern around shortages when a hard COVID-19 lockdown was imposed over 18 months ago. But these have helped ease fears and saved many from going hungry. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
In the shadow of Durban's popular Elangeni Hotel, Mtokozisi Kanyele tends to a vegetable garden at a homeless shelter. He lived on the streets for 3 years but moved to this site specially set up for the homeless at the start of the COVID-19 lockdown.
COVID was not a bad thing for me. It was actually a blessing in disguise. I got a place to stay at this shelter and I was able to work in this garden and earn an income.
The first harvest was a bumper one, earning Kanyili and his colleagues an equivalent of $1,000. The produce fed those at the camp and was sold to nearby shops and hotels.
They were buying in bulk. So as a result, job creation happened because the 15 guys were also, they were also assisted by our social workers in the site. So they assisted in terms of payment and everything, that they get paid after a week. So it was a great initiative.
Many of Kanili's colleagues have either left for another site or been reunited with their families, but he says this job is his only hope for now.
The shelter will help me sort out my life. I need to get an ID document, but continue working here to support my 2 children at home and start my own business selling vegetables.
Across town at the Kanana informal settlement, a community with over 100 families is taking care of its own needs with help from non-governmental organizations in Brazil and Italy.
We saw the need to start to produce for ourselves. Whatever that we do here that will contribute in the economy of this place, we said everything must come from here. There's no one here who owns a thing like a store, or even this garden is owned by the community. We grow spinach, cabbage, and even sometimes we grow carrots and beans.
Community and sidewalk gardens have been popping up across South Africa. These initiatives help some earn an income, but it mostly gives poor and vulnerable communities access to food in a time where costs are rising and job losses mounting. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Meanwhile, the 27th edition of the Pan-African Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou, which started on Saturday, 16th October, continues with several activities on the program. Here's CGTN's Desiree Canon telling us more.
One of the festivities of FESPACO is Celebrities Day, an evening of tributes to celebrities from the world of sport, theater, film, comedy, music, fashion, and dance. The evening was punctuated by music, sketches, speeches, and awards.
As a film actor, I can only be happy to receive such an award. I'm pleasantly surprised to be honored in this country. I thank and congratulate the organizers of the FESPACO and the whole city of Ouagadougou.
I accept this prize in the name of friendship between Senegal and Burkina Faso and in the name of Africa Youth and Pan-Africanism. I thank Burkina Faso for this beautiful recognition of me. It goes straight to my heart and I love this country very much.
The particularity of this third edition of Celebrities Day is that we have decided to reward the artists who put up Burkina Faso in the spotlight, especially sportsmen. We have decided to open up to dancers, musicians, poets, and all artists in general.
On the movie side, some 239 films from 50 countries were screened each day in a dozen cinemas in the capital, Ouagadougou, before a delighted audience.
It is an honor for me to be at this festival to offer my critical perspective on society. The festival started very well, and since then, wonderful films have been shown. I think there's some good work that has been done in the selection of films, and right now we are vibrating to the rhythm of some really good films.
The opening ceremony of the FESPACO began with a series of shows, including a tribute to the Burkinabe National Armed Forces. The tribute seemed like a hymn to the resistance against terrorism and COVID-19.
The holding of the FESPACO is a hope and an act to prove to those who want to give the impression that life must stop with terrorists that we're sure of one thing, that we will defeat terrorism, because I usually say that there is no possible future for terrorism.
In total, 17 films were in the running at Africa's premier film festival, but at the end of the competitions, Somali filmmaker Kadar Ahmed won the top prize for The Grave Digger's Wife, which he wrote and directed. The award ceremony was attended by Presidents Roch Marc Christian Kabore from Burkina Faso and President Macky Sall from Senegal, guest of honor of this biennial 17th edition of FESPACO. Désiré Canon, CGTN.
And before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand lost about 0.1%. That is after state power utility Eskom announced that it was extending scheduled power cuts until Saturday. Now, traders say after last week's late rally, the FX rate has found some resistance at the 14.85 rand per dollar mark. Meanwhile, Nigeria's Naira seems to be weakening slightly on the official market. It closed at around 422 Naira per dollar. That's compared to around 450 Naira per dollar, which it traded at on Monday. It continues to appreciate at the parallel market, hovering at around 572 Naira per dollar. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.